I have a habit of pacing. I'll try not to. But I can't stand behind that because for some reason I don't like talking to a room full of people like this. Hi, I'm Bridget. I can't see you from behind my laptop, so I have to stand out here. But in any case, so I'm going to talk to you today about distributed systems to some extent, but mostly comparisons to distributed teams. The obligatory about me slide. I've done a few things, not as many things as Andrew, but I've done a few things, worked a few places. If you've seen me talk somewhere else in the last year, it was probably about Docker. I'm not going to talk about Docker today. But I actually work for Pivotal now, and I'm not doing ops anymore either, which makes this kind of interesting because when I pitched this talk, I was actually on an ops team, and now I'm not. But interestingly enough, there's still a lot of parallels. So who here has read any of Kyle Kingsbury's research on distributed systems? A few people. Okay, so Kyle has written some really interesting posts about failure states in distributed systems. And so when I play the distributed systems free association game, I immediately start thinking of, Carly Rae Jepsen, right? Like thinking of Call Me Maybe. Because it's all about those misconnections and all about we have no idea what the state is, so we're going to make some assumptions and hope. And sometimes that goes terribly, terribly wrong when you're talking about computer distributed systems. Yes, I have actually run MongoDB in production. That was not awesome. That was 2 years I walked into a MongoDB already in progress. I did not make that call. But when we try to talk about the theoretical underpinnings behind failure in distributed systems, everybody goes right to CAP theorem. If you read Brewer actually wrote an article about 12 years later where I think it's published by something, but it might have even been InfoQ that actually has that up on their website. But basically, the idea of you can have consistency, and you can have maybe availability, and you can have partition tolerance, but you can have two of those three. It's a little bit more complicated than that, right? Because, for example, when do you know if you have a partition? There has to be some sort of timeout, right? Otherwise, you're waiting forever to see whether or not you're going to get an answer from the other side of the network split. And yeah, so this is very much like the kind of stuff that we can wrap our brains around and spend a lot of time worrying about. I mean, this stuff is pretty complex. I think that distributed teams are possibly even more so, but that's okay, because a lot of the stuff that we've learned from dealing with distributed systems, we can think about in the context of dealing with distributed teams of people as well. For example, I live in the middle of the United States, in the part that people usually fly over in Minnesota. And if it would take over 600 hours if I wanted to walk to the San Francisco office without stopping, I don't think I would do that. And I like walking. I've walked around London a lot, seen a lot of great sights. And what did you tweet? We saw lots and lots of statues. But the San Francisco Pivotal office is now not the only one I've visited. I actually got to go visit the London one. It was delightful. But it's the sort of thing where if you think about a person as being remote from their company, on our team, that's not actually how it works at all. Our entire team is distributed all over the place. We have people in the East Coast and the Midwest of the United States, a few folks in California, and actually somebody in Korea. So it's a little bit different than before, where most everyone on my team was in the East Coast and I was always in Central Time, wondering why I'm always an hour late for everything. And so it's kind of different. It's a little bit less fear of missing out when the whole team is kind of spread out versus everybody is having cake in the break room. I'm not having cake in the break room. I'm at home petting my cat. Or, not necessarily always at home. I do actually have a membership to a co-working space that I don't go to all that often. As it turns out, if you run meetups and DevOps days in town, then when you show up at the co-working space, people see you and want to talk to you. It's oh, I can't work from here. Sorry?
Co-procrastination.
Yeah, co-crastination. I love that. Yeah, the co-crastination space doesn't work super well for me. The coffee shop works a little bit better. They know what quiche I want, but they don't care about distributed systems at all. The airplane would be a great place for quiet concentration, except the part where the in-flight Wi-Fi is usually terrible. So, and so I do actually get most of my work done at home when I'm not at conferences or on the road or what have you. But what I've found that going out and visiting and meeting all these people, Andrew had a similar slide to this, but he was talking about, processes and practices. And I would, kind of go with perhaps the original intent of like, the part where we're dealing with people and interacting with each other is a lot more important than exactly how we do it. That said, everyone does want to focus and talk about the hows, so I'll talk about those a little bit. Just because I've spent the last year, I've worked for Andrew for a month now. Spoiler alert, I worked for that dude who gave the opening talk. I didn't when I originally pitched this talk, so sorry, Marco, for ending up with 2 pivotal people in a row on your website. But the year before that, though, I worked, from home for a company that was in Philly and New York, and a lot of the tools that we're using there, I'm still using, so we'll talk about them a little bit. But I don't want to focus on them too much because, like this XKCD shows, you can spend a lot of time worrying about technology, tools, exactly how you use it, and I really don't think that's the important part. So, but I would break a lot of these tools down into 2 categories, right? Because it's like how you're going to interact with the people. Is it going to be synchronous in real time, or is it going to be like, kind of a post and wait sort of thing? And I actually do put Twitter on this list because it's a toss-up as to whether or not Andrew's going to message me on work Slack or on Twitter. So, but in terms of like interacting with colleagues and also just like with the wider tech community, I would say you can use Twitter synchronously, certainly Slack. We do a lot of, collaboration in Google Drive of like sitting there editing the same document. Hangouts, I think, like video chat in general, whatever tool you want to use for that, is good. It's not persistent though, so more on that later. And then I actually, even though for some reason I do have a number of people who are always trying to catch me on like the Google Hangout chat stuff, I think that's terrible because it's not searchable, so I always try to send them towards Slack. In terms of the asynchronous stuff, like, if you want to use like Trello, Pivotal Tracker, anything like that, Trello, Pivotal Tracker, anything that can store your stories or however it is that you're doing that sort of work, both in the ops focus work that I was doing before and also in the, going out there and talking to people about ops focus work that I'm doing now. That's not necessarily where we end up with a lot of value, but I actually have found GitHub issues are perfectly fine for this sort of thing. And inside Pivotal, we also have a thing called Socialcast, which, it's one of those things where it's a useful tool for enough people that it's valuable to at least know that whatever tools it is you're using inside your organization, even if it's not the main way your team is communicating, it's kind of valuable.
I talked to the team on Slack and I talked to the sales guys.
That's a really good point. Andrew says he talks to the team on Slack, he talks to the sales team on Socialcast. And it is a good kind of one-way, post something and then maybe some people will answer. But anyway, so another person on Andrew's team, my coworker Casey West, wrote what I thought was a really good blog post, and you should all go read it. And these slides will be online later, so you don't need to copy the URL down right now. Or you could just go read his blog post and stop listening now. That would be okay too. But he made a really good point in this blog post about durable communication. And I want to emphasize that because sometimes if we're focusing on like, am I going to get an answer right now or am I going to get an answer later, we forget about how 6 months from us 6 months from now is probably going to need that answer even more than we need it today. So having a way to either search or in some other way preserve the communications, like for example, like I abhor any kind of outage that is being dealt with just by being on like, a Hangout or a conference call. Because then I think that is going to make the postmortem so much harder to write. It's like, please, let's keep this in Slack. Let's keep this in chat. It gives us timestamps. It's fantastic. We can see exactly when somebody tried the thing that turned out to be disastrous later. So I think the durable form of communication is super helpful. So yes, I love Slack enough that I wrote haiku about it. It's like, and keep in mind, like, I've been doing this stuff long enough that I just actually shut down an IRC server I'd been running for, 15 years or so on a FreeBSD box. And it's like, I didn't even need to keep running it, like for my friends, because Slack is that much better. So that's I don't work for Slack, but I really like it. Also, something else to keep in mind that I've noticed with the trying to sync up, across time zones, like Anthony was mentioning, is like sometimes that means that people are going to be dealing with stuff in a time zone that they don't want to. I did tell, there were folks who back in San Francisco who wanted me to be in a meeting today, or this morning, or late last night. And I said, okay, I can be in the meeting if my part starts no later than 11 p.m. in London. Because it's like, I have to actually be awake enough to talk to you here. I'm not Andrew. I can't just get off a plane and power through. Did you actually sleep?
I don't recommend it.
He got off a plane yesterday, and I don't think he actually slept. But so, like, I think that is something that I have a hard time letting go of. I don't have to be the one there, even if they wanted me there, and I'm new and I want to be there. But it's like, you know what? I can let go of that because I have written some actual durable stuff already about the topics that they wanted me to talk about, and other people got this. Like, it is okay to let other people be the ones to, say that they've got it. I don't need to be there. Something else I'd keep in mind, too, again, when you're talking about a distributed team, is that, yes, I know, it's TCP jokes, but your lower bandwidth communication, like the high bandwidth communication that we're getting in person at this wonderful conference with each other, thank you, Marco, is something that you don't necessarily have the luxury of getting every bit of information from people looking at you and laughing or whatever. Hopefully at what you're saying and, not at what you look like or whatever. But if you have the problem of being just like text, it's possible to miss a lot. It's possible to misunderstand. So over-communicating is not a bad thing. It's actually really helpful to me that I've been there at Pivotal for a month, and just, about halfway into that, Andrew decided to write a bunch of actual text in a Google Doc about what he thought that all the members of this team that he's assembling that's growing quickly should be doing as a team and individually. Shared it out, we can all edit it. And like that, just clear expectations, super helpful because, I'm looking at him now and I saw him a couple weeks ago, but I don't see my boss every day. I don't even talk to him every day. So it's actually really helpful. And something that we had, this is actually from when I worked at Drama Fever, but something that we had a little bit of maybe jokey stuff in our, of course, employee edited in GitHub employee handbook, as one does. Something that we had was actually like saying that, put yourself on the vacation calendar so you can see when your coworkers will be letting you down and let them know when you'll be repaying them for the favor. And one of my coworkers, Patty, went through and actually changed that to say, if you're out of the office, that doesn't mean that you're not working, first of all. And if you're on vacation, you're not letting people down. It's like what Colin was saying about burnout. It's like super important to not overwork yourself. And this is something, how many people in this room actually work in ops or have worked in ops in some capacity? So you know what I'm talking about. It's like it's possible to just burn yourself all the way down. And this is another screenshot from Drama Fever. It's like we had a very remote-friendly policy, even though a lot of people were close to the Philly office. And this was just from like one day, all the people who were working from home that day. And I thought it was kind of entertaining that there really didn't even have to be a specific reason. But then I was kind of like, okay, I'm always working from home, so I'm never sending these emails. But there didn't have to be a specific reason. But if you have a remote-friendly office, then people who need to go care for various life forms can actually do that, even if they would go into the office other times. And I also think that to make a distributed team work, it's really important to be explicit about what you're actually doing. So again, it's like if I'm radio silent for 2 days, it's like people don't necessarily know what I'm doing. And again, not all of us are Andrew and able to have slides come out fully formed like one particular day. He doesn't recommend it. Something else to keep in mind too is I know that this is an example of something that I've screwed up before is just jumping to conclusions or making the wrong assumption about the way somebody says something. So my boss Tim back at Drama Fever said a bunch of stuff in a GitHub issue that it was kind of straight and to the point, and I thought that he was really upset with me. And I was kind of upset until I decided to just ask him. And he wasn't upset with me at all. He was just in a hurry when he wrote that. But again, the durable communication stuff in text is really good and really useful. And also, as actual humans, we can sometimes be offended by it if we don't actually talk to each other and find out is this person really like telling me to, stop worrying about this thing because I shouldn't have been doing it because I was totally wrong? Maybe not. But you have to talk to each other to find out. And we've also, I think a lot of us have probably all been in that place where somebody else is going to, I don't know, like deploy something or delete something, and you're kind of like, no! And you can't always stop them. Fortunately, everything on that Jenkins server was chefified by that point. As it turns out, you should not delete the Jenkins home directory. Not actually a surprise, but actually possible to recover from. Having somebody else look at whatever it is you're going to do, whether it's something you're about to delete or something that maybe you're about to submit, talk to a conference, but your coworker is submitting a similar talk to the same conference. Should you do a joint submission? Should you possibly change your talk so that maybe you can both talk? But if they're too similar, again, talking to each other or even asking each other for help. I think that asking people for help when you're looking at them is maybe a little bit easier. And if you're wondering if they even have time for you, and then you're reaching out to see if they want to help you when you're far, far away, can be hard. But for me, it's important just to remember that asking someone for help is giving them a gift. It's giving them your trust, showing that you're vulnerable, and that you need them. And this is an important part of building empathy on a team. So that is actually okay. So if you follow John Allspaw at all, you're probably aware of his love of PDFs. If he doesn't email them to you, he probably is screen capping them and posting them on Twitter. This particular one I did go read, and it's really quite good. This is the Common Ground in Coordination and Joint Activity paper, Woods et al., 2004, so it's been around for a while. And it has lots of great diagrams. I pulled this one out in particular because what they're talking about in this paper is how when people are working on something jointly, we make a lot of inferences and a lot of assumptions about what we think the other person is going to do. Because again, back to the CAP theorem thing, when you're interacting with other humans, you're not always going to have perfect knowledge of their state at all times. But you have a pretty good idea, you think, of what they're doing, and then you're proceeding. And then if you're not communicating, if you get far enough away from each other, and not necessarily in physical distance, but far enough away from each other in communication that you have no idea where they're at, you can experience a serious disconnect. And we can stretch an analogy and call it a net split or whatever, but I did actually have the opportunity to ask Kyle Kingsbury his opinion of these general ideas that were bouncing around in my head when we had him on the Arrested DevOps podcast. And he said, well, it's not that CAP theorem really applies to people, but he definitely sees a value in fast feedback loops. So again, it's like if we can find out what somebody else is thinking, what somebody else is working on, before we get too far away from each other and then experience coordination surprise, that kind of seems like, doesn't that seem like a euphemism that would be in a really bad postmortem report? And you're just like, then the coordination surprise occurred. After that, all the data was lost. It's like, but this is the sort of thing that I feel like we spend a lot of time.
Attention please,
Ooh.
Attention please. The weekly fire alarm test is about to be carried out. Please take no further action.
Don't do anything.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? An incident has been reported in the Drummond Gate building. As a precaution, please leave the building immediately by the nearest exit. Do not use the lifts or the spiral staircase, but leave the building by the nearest numbered stairway.
Wait, why not the spiral staircase? I guess because it's not flame-proof or whatever. Interesting. It's good that they tell us that it's a test because, though honestly, this doesn't even sound like something that would be that alarming. What it sounds like is our Nest, what is that thing? The smoke detector that says alert, there is smoke. There's smoke in the kitchen.
Now complete. Thank you for your cooperation.
Okay. Anyway, yes, we cooperated quite well. I knew this was going to be during my talk, and hey, fortunately, this actually tells me what time it is. So, in any case, so there was no coordination surprise there. But yeah, so we spend a lot of time trying to architect these sorts of, discontinuities out of our computer systems. But I think it's important to put a little bit of mindfulness into how we consider how, as humans, we're also trying to coordinate with each other. And some TLDR on that, I guess, would be, again, distributing decision-making is super important if you want to actually operate a distributed team, right? Because if you're going to be blocking on, some sort of like, we can only do rights here, stretch an analogy even further, but if you're going to be blocking on single points of failure, even if those single points of failure are someone who's on a plane, or someone who's in a time zone where they're sleeping, or someone who has too many meetings, or whatever, I think the problem with that, and I've totally been guilty of this, is like, hey, I want to get consensus. I want to get buy-in from other people. Maybe I'm new. Maybe I don't want to make unilateral decisions that are going to affect other people. And this is all valid. Like, paying attention to what other people want to accomplish is super important. But at the same time, like, pushing the decision-making to the edge as much as possible is how microservices work, and it's how distributed systems, work in many cases. And trying to do that on a team, I think, is pretty valuable. So I would recommend that. The over-communicating, you don't necessarily have to be all TCP joke about it, but I know, right? I mean, better than a UDP joke, right? You have no idea if they got it. But with the over-communicating is, can be as simple as somebody saying on Slack, hey, I'm going to a doctor's appointment. It's like, well, that's good because now you know that that person isn't going to be answering you anytime soon. Or I think I'm a pretty big fan of just saying hi in the morning, whenever your morning is. Pro tip, turn off all of the noises that your Slack makes if on your phone, if you're not on ops anymore and you don't need to wake up every time somebody says your name in panic on the ops channel. Like you don't actually, at least I've found that the notifications on one's phone is something best seen and not heard if you'd like to sleep. Because otherwise you can't, especially with people in a lot of time zones, you can't prevent somebody from saying your name. And if that's your Slack handle and it wakes you up, just turn off the noises. And then there's, of course, like, hey, you've made these distributed decisions when you're on different sides of, the planet or the argument or whatever. But resolving conflict, hey, I made it a bullet point on a slide, so it's really easy, right? Yeah, no. But again, it's like caring about, and we're going to have plenty of talks that cover this sort of stuff, so I don't need to go into it, but caring about what other people are thinking and feeling and experiencing is just as important as trying to come to a right solution, because these are all people who you have to work with on the team. And I tweeted this a while ago because, wow, the Django 1.4 to 1.7 upgrade was really horrible, and Cache Machine stopped working, and it was all sadness. But I think the important point about this is that creating reality with the words that we type into computers is pretty powerful stuff. I mean, it's pretty profound. It's as close to wizardry as you're going to get. And it's also very personal, right? Because you're creating reality out of your thoughts and your decisions and your desires and like instantiating them into the actual world. And if somebody else strongly disagrees with them, it can be really hard not to take it personally because they're really strongly disagreeing with the manifestation of your will. But I think it's really important to remember that they have something that they're trying to do and create too. And so understanding that is how we get better at being practitioners and at being, operators, developers, or technologists of any sort. And it is hard. And I think it's harder than backporting patches into HBase because the version on Amazon's AMIs is so old that you have region problems and can't run HBCK. I mean, all the kind of stuff that, of course, we've all done stuff like that, and that's not easy. But I think this stuff is actually harder and probably more important. So. And I should go back and point out that you should definitely go check out Astrid Atkinson on Twitter. She is a director of engineering in search at Google and has been there for like a decade and is super fascinating and did a really good keynote about engineering for the long game at Velocity in Santa Clara last summer. So you should definitely go read her Twitter. And okay, so not all war metaphors, but this particular one, Andrew Kleshafer, he didn't put it in the slide deck, but he likes to put Gatling guns in a lot of his slide decks to talk about a technological shift that can be a competitive advantage. And I think that that's true. Like when you have a very innovative technology, whether it's, something like, I haven't really said anything about Pivotal in this talk, so I'll mention like, Bosch and Cloud Foundry. Andrew was mentioning like all of the kind of stuff that came out of, Borg. And the idea of like having much more complete control of your automation. Like, sure, this kind of technical stuff is super exciting. Definitely a competitive advantage. I think that there's also a case to be made for distributed teams being a competitive advantage. Because like Anthony was mentioning with Follow the Sun coverage, sure, absolutely. But also with the kind of advantages that you get from being able to hire people when they become available. We just added some wonderful people to our team who, like you saw on that map, are scattered throughout the United States. If you want to hire people who don't live like in one particular crowded metro area in the United States, for example, and you want to hire people in different countries, if you want to hire people in different time zones, if you just want people with different viewpoints or backgrounds, like being able to operate a team that is spread out, physically, I think is a pretty serious advantage. So.
No matter where you live, there's always more talent everywhere else.
And Andrew makes a very good point. No matter where you live, there's always more talent, everywhere else. So draw from everywhere would be my recommendation. And if this sounds exciting and fun to you, Pivotal is hiring. So you should talk to us at the booth or to Andrew or myself. And we can tell you about some of the exciting opportunities. And I have no idea if I have time for questions or not. So I do, fantastic. And I have a question. What would your short speech disguised as a question be, sir?
How do you interview for remote workers? Because obviously you have quite a lot of experience of it and over communication and that sort of thing. It seems really critical. How do you find out if somebody has those skills in a short period of time? Because they're obviously interviewing for a ton of other places and everybody's trying to get them first. How do you make that happen?
That's a really good question. So the question was, how do you interview for remote or distributed workers, especially in a competitive landscape where you don't want to take forever trying to hire them because somebody else might grab them first? So I have not interviewed anyone at Pivotal yet, but when I interviewed people remotely at Drama Fever, I actually interviewed someone last year while I was in Amsterdam right before DevOps Days Ghent. And that was fine because other people in the interview were in New York and in Philly, and I think the candidate was also in Philly in the office. The office had a Chromecast, set up. But the assessing people, like talking to them about, what they've done before, I don't know that that's necessarily different when you're talking to them on the other end of a video chat versus talking to them sitting in a conference room. I'm sorry? That's true. I did interview at Pivotal. So, and the way Pivotal did it as well is I talked to Andrew first, and then I talked to 4 other people over the course of a week, all on Google Hangouts. And I think that maybe the heart of that question is, how do you assess if somebody is going to be effective as a remote worker? And so the actual process of interviewing them may not be entirely different. Assessing whether or not they're going to be effective, especially if they have no history of doing it, is, I think, tough. But I would probably look for people who are explicit with their communication and who have documented some sort of history of having written something in public, whether it's code or blog posts or whatever, so that you can see that they can communicate. Because like what Andrew was saying about being able to read and write and listen and understand are really important technical skills. So if you can see that the person can communicate effectively, then I would say that would be the most important thing to look for. Yes?
Do you think that leadership is important in distributed teams?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Having strong leaders in a distributed team is important? Or?
Yeah, so the question was, do I think having a strong leader in a remote team is important? And I think yes, with a caveat, because I don't think that the leader has to, whoever's managing the team has to set all of the direction for what everyone is going to do at every moment of every day. I do think that they need to have a clear vision for what they want the team to be, even if that vision is evolving over time. So, as the team grows, as people join it. If the person who has a remote team of people reporting to them is not comfortable with the idea of not being able to see their employees, sitting in seats every day, they might not be suited to managing that sort of team. So they have to buy into that themselves first. Yes.
There's also a distinction between leadership and management.
That's a really good point. Andrew points out there's a distinction between leadership and management. And management is a lot of, checklist of responsibilities. And not every person who is acting with leadership in the organization is necessarily going to be a manager. I would like to see some leadership coming out of management. Fortunately, I'm in a position where I have that. But I would say I've definitely worked in scenarios in the distant past where there has been no leadership coming out of management. And that's a significant problem in and of itself. Yeah. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so you talk a lot about Slack.
Okay.
My team is also distributed, and we don't use Slack, but we use something similar.
Sure. Any kind of group chat.
Hip chat in this case. I've also experienced that it can become your biggest enemy almost because it doesn't acknowledge emotion or sarcasm or stuff like that. Have you?
Yeah.
Same experience?
Yeah. Very very good point. So the question was using group chat. This person has experienced that it's also become the team's biggest enemy because it doesn't acknowledge emotion, sarcasm, things like that. And I think that the creators of different group chats are trying to help with that by Slack, for example, recently added emoticon, like emoji reactions as something that you can react to somebody's specific line with, various, faces or whatever. And I do think that you have to, when you're being explicit about your communication, you also have to be explicit about, saying /sarcasm or, laughing aloud more. I didn't used to think LOL was punctuation, and I've definitely become accustomed to using it because sometimes you have to make people feel more comfortable, that it is more casual, it's more conversational. Because otherwise, you're right, it can end up feeling very robotic. You just have these robotic voices giving you commands and distracting you all day. The distractions are also another matter that you have to kind of work out with your team when you're going to be heads down working on stuff instead of just on chat all the time. Because sometimes you possibly have things you need to write or accomplish. And I know Marco said only one more, but I did see one more hand, and I don't want to say no to this one last person.
So comment on this.
Quick comment.
Yes. You said over-communicating several times. Over-communicating your feelings as well is very important because people will think and hear your voice in their head when you type something. So be sure to say what you intend to say, what your feelings are, so they don't put some other feelings into it.
Exactly. Just mentioning that you should communicate your feelings as well, so that other people don't make their own interpretations of what your tone or what your desires are when you're saying something. And one last person, because you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how do you get people engaged in the company if they're remote workers? Because that's the argument we're having at the moment. All our remote workers are people who previously worked in offices and had to go home for various family reasons or whatever. But we can't actually hire remotely because of the fear of they won't engage in the company, they won't believe the culture, etc.
Yeah, so the question was, how do you get people engaged in the company if they're remote workers? Because the fear of hiring remote workers could be that they're not going to be engaged in the culture or in the company. If your company thinks that culture is the beer fridge and the ping pong table, they might not be thinking large enough, because the culture can also be what the people who work at your company believe and what they say and how they present themselves and position themselves on the internet when they're interacting with the wider world. And when you're worried about people being engaged, you do have to reach out to them. I did go in, nobody said I had to, but I wanted to, and I did go in for my first couple weeks actually and be in person at one of the pivotal offices. I do think that meeting people in person right away is not always feasible for somebody, but I actually have a friend who works for GitHub who he had a new baby and switched jobs to GitHub in pretty much the same couple of week period. And GitHub actually sent a couple of people to Minneapolis to onboard him so that he didn't have to go with his, wife and brand new baby to San Francisco. And I think, so thinking outside the box in terms of making sure you have a way to reach out to people is really important. And just making them feel included. Like Drama Fever did a good job of sending me swag. And like Pivotal, when I went to, go on board, gave me a whole bunch of Pivotal t-shirts that fit me, that I don't even have to alter. And it's like, this is important, let me tell you. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a little more work to reach out to people, but if you consider how difficult it is to hire, I think it's worth it. All right.
I actually think that's.
So thank you again.
Wait, sorry, Andrew had one more thing to say. Yes, Andrew?
I was just gonna say, like, you can be remote most of the time, but there's a high value to being in the same room periodically. Like, the people that I've been most successful working with remotely, there's always like, you have to build that human connection some way, and there's no more effective way to do that than in person, and then you can be remote the rest of the time.
Yeah, and Andrew's just pointing out for the benefit of the recording that it's really good to build some human connections in person, whether it's during onboarding or at conferences that different team members all manage to make it to, or if you can just manage some layover in their city, whatever. Spending a little bit of time in person is really valuable because then you have that empathy for the people. And if you sing karaoke with somebody, maybe you're going to be less upset when they mess up something with MySQL later. So, all right, thank you.